Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are still full of energy for another circular economy session. We are seeing that circular economy is really a booming topic this week. And after this, outside on the other side of the street, there's yet another event on circular economy. So let me welcome, say a few welcoming words, but first I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have around us here. I've just a little bit practiced some names, and I can say that because I already checked with Antoine Auger. He had also difficulties in pronouncing my family name. So we have here with us Antoine Auger. He's head of the Global Challenges and SDGs Institute for European Environmental Policy. And then we have with us online, you see him, Kagauta Mokohena. I've practiced Kagauta. Kagauta is Chief Director, Chemicals and Waste Policy, Monitoring and Evaluation, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment in the government of South Africa. And then we have also online with us, and you also see her, Miss Angelica Romero. Angelica is head of the Division of Trade and Sustainable Development at the Undersecretariat of the International Economic Relations Government of Chile. Then we have to my left, Miss Maria Teresa Pisani, head of Sustainable Trade and Outreach Unit, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And on the right, we have my colleague, Luca Marmo, senior expert of the Directorate General for Environment, whom I'm also very grateful for helping to organize this, and of course also W2 Secretariat and the organizers. So I'll do a few introductory remarks, and then we have a pretty standard running of a panel discussions followed by a panel introductions, panel discussions, and a possibility for questions. So thank you for joining Geneva and online. We hope that this event on circular design and trade will contribute to the many discussions on the circular economy taking place this week. International activities on circular economy have previously focused on two areas: improving the sustainability of production globally, for example, assisting more sustainable, resource efficient production through domestic circular economy measures, and on facilitating global trade in end-use products for circularity, whilst also controlling trade in waste. There's now some understanding of these aspects of circular economy in trade circles, and a number of events this week try to identify this link. For example, the US event yesterday looked at the importance and relevance of circular economy throughout the whole value chain. But a third significant area of transition to the circular economy is the design of products. This is a necessary complement, as 80% of the environmental impacts of a product are determined by its design. I'm sure we will hear more about this later. The changes to product markets in developed economies and their potential relevance for trade discussions has been much less explored, although the impact on products traded will be significant. Change in market preference by brands, retailers, customers, and through legislative requirements are driving this change, particularly in the EU, but also in other markets, notably the US and Japan. Shifting demands for products and materials are an established aspect of globalized trade. As market demands changes, the opportunities for existing economic sectors change. Some sectors and the countries which host them will likely lose revenues and employment, and others gain revenues and employment. Circular economy is a response to the unsustainable environmental and sometimes social impacts from ever-increasing resource use. Let's take an example: transport. Increased demand for electric vehicles and its batteries will lead to increased use of materials. Circular economy will be crucial for transforming our sector if we want to ensure sufficient supply of materials. At least from an EU perspective, the transition to a circular economy is an economic growth strategy. It aims to increase the value of products and services delivered by the use of resources, whilst reducing the volume of raw materials and their associated negative impacts. The importance of the circular economy transition and the interplay with trade has been increasingly recognized in the WTO, notably through the TESTI and more generally the work in the Committee on Trade and Environment. Today's event is meant to contribute to that debate and provide some elements from different parts of the globe and different perspectives on how trade policy could contribute to favoring the transition and vice versa, how circular economy policies and legislations can be made supportive of sustainable trade. Before giving the floor to our panelists for an initial 5-minute introduction, a few housekeeping remarks. Those of you who are participating online, please note that you have been muted to avoid the usual noise problems of hybrid meetings. You will, however, be able to ask questions and/or post comments through the Zoom chat function. Colleagues will help me monitor such questions and relay them to panelists. Comments will be recorded and used in the preparation of the event's report. So with that these introductory remarks, I'm going to turn to the first panelist, Antoine. What is circular design of products and what is its relevance to trade?
Thank you very much, Madeleine, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's a great pleasure to have been invited to participate to this event as part of this wonderful week organized by the WTO. So yes, we start with a global question. What is circular trade? How it relates to trade relations worldwide? So I'd like to start with connecting circular economy, circular design, and then how it interconnects with trade eventually. To start with, to say that the global economy is currently mostly structured around a linear model of production and consumption, in which the world resources are extracted, consumed, and then thrown away. More than 90% of the resources consumed each year are eventually discarded either into landfills or incinerated. This extraction and production models alone contributes to at least 50% of all carbon emissions and 95% of all terrestrial biodiversity loss. So this linear model of production and consumption has a obvious detrimental approach to resource use and is a primary driver of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. Circular economy aims to address that issue and to achieve an absolute decoupling of economic growth and the environmental impact that it generates. We usually talk about circular economy around several positive trends. We have the idea to avoid the use and the eventual exhaustion of non-renewable energy and material resources. We have looping materials back into the economy at the end of their life cycle through reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, recycle. And that happens mostly through design for circularity, as you've mentioned. And finally, we could mention the slowing the rate of flow of materials in the economy, and that happens through the design for durability. So these are all aspects of circular designs. They all refer to a capacity to produce and exchange goods and services that are designed to be durable and circular over their life cycles, which means that they are easy to recycle, non-toxic, repairable, and reusable. So today we'll be looking mostly at these points, these aspects of circular designs. We are going to look, of course, of how trade policy interconnect with that in that process. So when we talk about circular trade, what do we usually mention? What do we usually mean? We talk about trade in circularity enabling goods or services around the globe, facilitating the access, facilitating the flow of these circular goods and services. We talk about trade in second-hand goods for reuse, repair, refurbishment, etc., etc. This trade in second-hand goods, both in terms of volumes, but also in terms of value. And we'll see that this is an absolutely crucial part of the design. And we could also mention trade in secondary raw materials and trade in waste that can and should be safely recovered and valorized eventually back into another value chain. So right there already, we see that we have a number of examples of how trade relations impact and circular design and trade relations impact each other. That brings a lot of challenges, that brings also a lot of opportunities. Durable design would extend the lifetime, and perhaps most important, the value of second-hand goods, as I said, even up until the end, until the stage of them being waste that can still be valued. And so thus creating new trade opportunities in these second-hand goods or revalued waste. We could also consider simple trade in services, but simple, it's never simple trade in services, of course, but such as the circular design expertise services, or at least some kind of facilitated access to design software that could promote the use of the sustainable and circular business models. We can also mention trademarked circular design, I already identified and trademark design, that can also have a profound intellectual property impact. So these are all opportunities in terms of global value chains when you talk about circular trading goods. Yet, we also must mention that these more stringent circularity requirements for products, and including product designs, could create additional technical barriers to trade. And that can be problematic, especially for stakeholders in value chains that are facing capacity issues, whether they are public or private. So these new technical barriers will require investments in cleaner production process, system for transparency and traceability, and also on circular product designs. So these are the challenges that face us when we look at this particular aspect. There are several legislative measures expected, current, existing, and in the near future, and I'm sure we'll go through some of them from the EU. But yet, key questions remain as to the intended impact they will have on suppliers, and in particular, the micro and small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, in low-income countries. These questions have not yet sufficiently addressed, and they need to be when we are scaling up and scaling out these new initiatives. So eventually, circular design aims to enable the additional use cycle at the end of first life of a product. Circular design is also linked to a number of services and intellectual property aspects. This brings a lot of opportunities for circular trade worldwide, but they are all usually diffused in the economy through agreements on the diffusion of strict product standards that can be associated with challenges for value chain actors lacking capacities. So eventually, these are all massive impacts of circular trading goods linked to circular design. I'm going to stop here. I'm sure we can have a lot more to discuss, including concrete examples. I'm glad you mentioned electric vehicles, because that is one of them, and we can then get into more details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for making this concrete connection between circularity and how this can translate to trade, whether it is opportunities within IP, I hear, but also in recognizing that this creates new requirements that also need to be translated into capacities of those in the supply chain, being able to comply with it. So the next panelist on my list is Kagauta Mokoena. Can I invite you to talk about the perspectives on shifts to circular products in international markets? The floor is yours. Are you going to help me to?
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be part of this session, and gladly and highly appreciated. The transitioning to circular economy is an economic growth strategy which aims to increase the value of products and services delivered by the use of resources while reducing the volume of raw materials and their associated negative environmental impact. Because the products are used for both domestic and international customs, trade, and involvement of all stakeholders is very critical in the production processes. Circular economy makes business sense, and at the same time, it adds value to products. So hence, it is a must do for business, more especially SMEs who are intending to make a contribution in their growth, as well as the growth of the environment in which they are operating in, more so if it's a developing country. Circular economy also makes trade locally and internationally possible, because green products or circular products are becoming more and more a requirement by customers and certain strategic partners, depending on the type of a business or a trade, a company or an enterprise is involved in. This is very important because you find that in terms of green products or circular products, there is usually a concern about limited access to markets when the green products or circular products are manufactured. So hence, with circular economy in trade enables that, as well as the access to markets by those small, medium, and micro enterprises would normally have a challenge with trading with other parts of the globe. Circular economy implementation is also for trade purposes. For instance, in receiving destinations where circular economy implementation or circular products are a requirement by customers, such as in the EU, you find that there, for any enterprise who should want to trade in that space from elsewhere or another country or developing country, would have to make sure that they comply with the requirements as per the customer request. The inclusion of circular language in multilateral environmental agreements discussions, such as the SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production, is quite key, because it says at that level, at multilateral environmental agreements level, there is high level adoption and understanding of the significance of circular economy, and at the same time, the extent to which it can go in assisting trade and facilitating trade. Chemicals and waste economy initiatives in South Africa involved a number of circular economy initiatives, and these assisted quite a lot in terms of contribution to the economy, economic growth, as well as diverting waste away from landfill. Circular Economy Action Plan is to be developed for South Africa as part of the circular economy transitioning of the country. And at the same time, the Circular Economy Action Plan will be developed as part of the national legislation, which is the National Waste Management Strategy for South Africa, in this case, which was adopted by Cabinet in 2020. And at the same time, it is currently being implemented as a policy for South Africa, which has three important principles. Circular economy is one of those principles, waste hierarchy is one of those, and the polluter pays is the third principle. The implementation of circular economy in products manufacturing makes sense, as well as business sense, as I've alluded to earlier on, largely because it also provides for competitive advantage and for companies in developing countries to be on par with their competitors elsewhere across the globe. For instance, at regional level, the African Circular Economy Alliance assistance in facilitating the implementation of circular economy in Africa assists in getting more and more countries participating in circular economy adoption, more and more countries participating in the implementation of circular economy, which is quite key and relevant for getting trade either in the African Union space or the African Free Trade Zone space, or Africa and other regions as we see trade taking place in a global village. African circular economy as a regional approach, as well as the African Circular Economy Alliance as a regional body, assist in taking circular economy forward and also enabling trade. The regional organization's significance can never be overemphasized. I think Latin America is the same coalition in circular economy, while at global level, the Global Alliance on Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency is also playing a very critical role globally on the promotion of circular economy, while ensuring that there is opportunities for trade on circular products as well as on green products. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Kagauta, for this extremely interesting sharing of experiences and information of South Africa. Very interesting to know the action plan and the call for and the importance of access and to enable access to markets for SMEs, and also the global dimension, the strategies that South Africa has developed to work on circular economy and building in a bigger alliance on it. Thank you. And for that, after that, I turn to Angelica. We go back to online for a Chilean perspective on the national and global circular economy.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madeleine, and thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this panel. And I want to start by saying that it's very important to have this space and to bring ideas among us in order to see how we can move towards circular economy and how can trade help us in doing that. In our perspective, Chile try to capture in the concept of circular economy different other concepts, such as the one that my colleagues already mentioned, efficiency, reuse, recycle, sustainable management, etc. So in Chile, we have a circular economy roadmap that we put there, different goals in order to move toward a more circular productions and consumption. This roadmap aims to accelerate and guide this transition process, and it's from 2020 to 2040. And it looks for initiative based on 4 main line of action, innovation, because we think designing is critical in order to move towards circularity, awareness, because we need to, educate consumers how to, buy and what they need to see in order to have this concept of circularity when they buy. Regulations, because we need to change some mode of production, and regulation could help on that. And also economic instruments, because we feel that, as you mentioned, there are certain sectors that needs help and it could, gain, and others that maybe not. So we need to take a look at there. And there is a concept that our Ministry of Environment always mentioned, that is the social, ecological just transition, in order to capture all the 3 pillars of sustainable development. And this circular roadmap help us and have these 4 lines. And right now we are working on the sectorial roadmaps. For example, we have the Circular Commune Without a Garbage program. That is a program that strengthens capacity in municipalities and regional governments to implement the national organic waste strategy. As you may know, we lost a lot of organic, foods, or we generate organic waste, a lot of organic waste annually, and we are working in order to reduce this loss and find ways to have a better management of them. So right now we are drafting a bill, in order to move toward differentiated management of organic waste in order to help on that direction. We also have, a framework law for waste management. It's the extended producer responsibility and promotion of recycle. And it captures, priority products, this goal, obliges producers to organize and finance the collection and the recycling of or recovery, the waste that they produce. So we are right now making, regulation for lubricating oils, batteries, electrical and electronic equipment in order to move towards those, a better management for those waste. We also are working in packaging and tires, that are also part of this law. And I want to also mention that we want to reduce the plastic that we are generating here. So we have two different laws. The first one is that prohibits the use of plastic bags, and the other one that prohibits the use of single-use plastic, such as, for example, glass of plastic that you can have, in different restaurants or fast food, etc. That is an example. So we are facing, challenges in order to implementing all these laws and policies. And MSMEs, as Kagauta was mentioning, is part, is an important part, has an important role here, because most of the recyclers, are MSMEs, so they need support in order to move towards enhance, the capacity that they have in order to recycle and have, like in this chain, a better work, with other actors. So we are also working with public participation with all the actors in order to move towards this circularity. And trade is very, very important on that, because packaging is part of trade, and a lot of the goods that I already mentioned are part of the trade that we do as exporter or importers. So trade has an important role also. And I'm going to stop here and give the opportunity to have other questions after the presentation of the other colleagues. Thank you.
Gracias, Angelica. Thanks a lot for this very interesting Chilean perspective, highlighting also, again, the role of SMEs. I think that's important also to say, but also to share your experiences on packaging and your overall roadmap, 2022 to 2024, and how this relates to trade. I now turn to Luca Marmo. Luca, developments in the EU related to circular product design. There's been a lot of activity, so run us through that in the few minutes that you have.
Thank you, Madeleine. Good afternoon to all colleagues here in Geneva and to those connected with us through Zoom. Indeed, a lot of activity, and I will echo in my presentation things that have already been said by Kagauta and Angelica. Yes, goes on. I think I don't need to dwell on this a lot because Antoine has already mentioned some of these aspects. Just to say the background of actions by the EU on supporting circular economy transition is the fact that we are in a planetary crisis, that we consume more than what the planet is able to absorb and to cope with and to provide. I would like to highlight figures that you will see, or you will see in the first, on the left-hand side column, are coming from the International Resource Panel, 90%, more than 90% of the biodiversity impacts, the water stress impacts, about 50% of climate change, and 1/3 of the health impacts are linked with the extraction and processing of material resources. This means cultivation of biomass. This means extraction of metals. This means extraction of minerals that we need for construction, buildings, and so on. So a large or very large chunk of environmental impacts is due to the material resources that we use and we need for our economy, for our well-being, and we need to be aware of the impacts they have. So we need to use them also more sustainably, longer, the products with which these materials, that use this material to be produced. Voila, just a little refresh on the circular economy to mention that in our approach, it covers the full life cycle from the design, I mean, the extraction first of the materials, I was saying, the design phase, the use part, then the end of life of products and goods, the waste management part, and we would like to make that circle becoming true. At the moment, circular economy, I think Research Institute evaluates that the world is about 8% circular. So and the EU is just a little bit better than the average. So a long way to make that circle a reality. One of the initiatives that the EU has been taking through its numerous circular economy packages that Madeleine and colleagues have been bombarding you with in past months and years. So one particular is the one I would like to mention today, and is a proposal, a legislative proposal for regulation, so for EU legislation on eco-design for sustainable product, ESPR, for those who like acronyms. Thomas, I think it's better if yeah, thanks. So this is going to be initially framework legislation that sets the context and builds on already existing legislation that we have on eco-design that at the moment is focusing on energy aspects. We want to broaden this legislation to other aspects than energy, and I will come back to that in a moment. So framework legislation, giving the global context, which will be supplemented through product-specific measures to be elaborated on a kind of product-by-product category basis. And all this through working plans. So we will decide which product category to go first and which will go later. And all this in a very open and transparent manner. Thomas, thanks. So if you are able to see what is on this slide, these are the different product aspects that under this new piece of legislation we would like to cover. So aspects related to the durability of products, how reliable they are, how many times they get broken, can be they reused, facilitate reuse, facilitate to repair them. So can I dismantle easily and can I get spare parts? So all these aspects which are about making products last longer and also be easier to repair, so that easier to be reused. And all this is before getting to the phase of the recycling of the materials of which these products are made, which is of course part of the circular economy and is of course good, but is much better if we can improve the reuse because it has less energy and therefore environmental impacts implications. And it's also much better if we can avoid, as Madeleine was saying, impacts in the design phase, because up to 80% can be kind of addressed there. And that proposal is to go in that direction. So how the whole thing will work? We will have working plans that will be adapted, focusing on certain product types. There is going to be a preparatory study and a full impact assessment for this, so that we will evaluate economic, social, and environmental impacts, including on third countries of the proposals. All these to be also discussed in an eco-design forum that will bring stakeholders together, finally arriving to the adoption of measures with stakeholder inputs throughout this process. One particular aspect that the European Commission has proposed in the context of this proposed legislation is the so-called digital product passport, which is basically a way of saying in order to enable the reparability, reuse, and to give information about the impacts of the product and the material in which the product has been made, products should be accompanied by a passport that contains this key information. So along the value chain, so that this is communicated in a transparent manner. And of course, there is work ongoing how all this can be engineered in practice. What are the implications with the objective of enabling, facilitating what the eco-design for sustainable product regulation intends to do, that is to lower environmental impacts while at the same time supporting economic growth through circular approaches. And if we go to the next slide, you will see that a bit of a similar idea has been floated by the world's environment ministers at the 5th meeting of the United Nations Environment Assembly that took place in March of this year in Nairobi, Kenya. UNEA, so the United Nations Environment Assembly, adopts resolutions, and one of them this year was about enhancing circular economy in support of sustainable consumption and production, which is one of the goals under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And in the third bullet, which is a bit of a summary of some key elements of that resolution, in the third bullet, you have the Assembly inviting member states, relevant organizations, networks to cooperate in sharing and discussing best practices regarding relevant product information along value chains. So this idea of transmitting information along the value chain is also part of this discussion at least in the environment community, so to say, and we would like to bring it more also in the trade community. Now coming to, and I think this is my last slide, I believe, the international aspects of all this with the trade implications. So the first is that the rules under this new piece of legislation will apply to all products put on the EU market. I mean, yes, not all products, because, for example, food, medical devices, and others are exempted. But let's say all the products within the scope of this piece of legislation, whether fabricated, manufactured within or outside the EU, will be subject to the same rules. So there is same rules applying for product puts on the EU market. There is consultation of stakeholders, as I said, including from third countries, and aspects related to impacts on third countries and international trade will be part of the impact assessment that we will do when looking at the different product categories that will be part of the work program under the piece of legislation. Again, these specific measures will be notified to WTO under the TBT procedure, because we have to do that kind of thing. We are about, well, by the end of this year, we plan to launch a public consultation on which should be the first product types, the first product categories that should undergo this process. And depending on the legislative process within the EU that involves the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. So, as I said, this is a legislative proposal by the European Commission. It's not yet EU legislation, but we foresee that first measures under this piece of legislation could be on stream, let's say, more or less 2 years down the line, so about in 2024, of course, depending on how negotiations go with the co-legislators. And I think this one, voila. So thank you, and looking forward to discussions with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luca, for the developments in the EU and explaining, bringing us through also how this links in international work in UNEA, and including the upcoming legislative developments. Let me turn to our last panelist, Maria Teresa. Maria Teresa will talk about UNICEF work on facilitating global supply chains and the circular economy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. A real pleasure to be with you all this afternoon for this panel. So, yes, this is going to be about global action, what we are currently doing in this context at United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And let me start by pointing out that you can improve what you can measure, and that verifiable information collected and exchanged among value chain actors is actually key to reduce use of new resources, reuse products and parts, recycle waste, and develop circular product design. Now, in the EU context, why is this important? I mean, Luca was just mentioning about that. The EU Sustainable Product Initiative of March 2022, the EU Strategy for Sustainable and Circular Textile, the proposed regulation on eco-design requirements put actually a strong emphasis on two key requirements: the performance requirements, durability, reparability, reusability, recyclability, environmental and carbon footprint, microplastic release, hazardous substances, waste generation, and information requirements, which means that information on product performance must be supplied with the product. Information may be provided on the product packaging, on the label, on a website, and in a product passport. So the digital product passport that Luca was mentioning goes exactly in that direction. Now, traceability is about this. It's about gathering and exchanging the data all along the value chain, from the raw material production and processing, through manufacturing, branding, retailing, consumption, and post-consumption, in a way that can inform circular product design, production, and use. Now, value chains, as we all know, are global. They are complex, production facilities are scattered all over the world, and achieving the necessary traceability is a very complex effort that involves action at multiple levels to respond to an increasing demand from consumers, from investors, from regulators, and within the value chain for sustainable and circular product credentials that can be verified and can be trusted. So the issue of trust on credentials on the circular sustainable performance of products is very important. Now, as part of the work we have been conducted at United Nations, we, together with a large group of stakeholders, we have been looking and working on these multiple dimensions. And basically, these dimensions concerns, first of all, the global policy and normative tools that need to be there to establish a level playing field. Clear rules of the game, especially to alleviate the impact of due diligence legislation on producing countries. And this is more and more evident as we see an acceleration in the normative production. The EU, of course, but US, Japan, UK, Australia are among the countries that are accelerating regulation in this context. Second, this requires harmonization and standardization, which needs basically to cover information exchange at the B2B, at the B2G, and at the B2C level. So shared definitions, classifications of what it constitutes circular activities and goods are going to be clear. A common language for actors that operate along these global and complex value chains are very important. And standards for interoperability of information exchange systems are very important. This also requires looking into the potential of innovation, digitalization, and advanced technologies. And this is what Angelica was exactly strengthening before. And it was interesting to see actually that the pillars of the Chilean circular economy roadmap touch exactly upon all these dimensions. So the circular and the digital transition need to go hand in hand. Advanced technologies, blockchain, artificial intelligence, satellite imaging to support the verification of credentials are going to play a very important role, but we need to make sure that SMEs, vulnerable actors in emerging economies, developing countries can harness that potential. So a full set of instruments and measures to help them harness this potential is very important. And finally, this requires public-private partnership and more collaborative business models along value chain. We have been testing and working on implementing such approaches along value chains in the textile and garment industry in particular. And we have seen that whenever collaborative business models are there that connect the downstream and upstream part of the value chain, that information exchange, that collection of verified credentials is much easier, less costly, and less complex. So these are the dimensions and areas of intervention from for the UNEC initiative, which we are now implementing since 3 years. And this is something that is there with the support of the European Commission. And this is the approach that our member states are requesting us actually to customize to other sectors like critical raw minerals, transport and logistics that are key for the circular transition. And just let me close here. Glad to provide more details on this work and on the work of the UNEC team of specialists on ESG traceability for circular value chains and to take part in the Q&A discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for this last but very sort of good concluding remarks of the introduction by the panelists, giving us the global picture. And what we pick up from you is actually what we also heard in Kagauta's and Angelica's intervention is what I would say also the capacity building with the transparency. And I like very much the link you make with the upstream, downstream, and the more collaborative tools that are available there, the more verifiable this for everybody in the supply chain to exchange this information that comes there. So very, very interesting. We've taken more time than I thought, so we are not going to do all the panel questions that we had prepared. So maybe what we could look at is rather a sort of generic question. I'll put up I'll do two now and then each one in a round, because with what you've been saying, I think for the audience here, what we're trying to gather here this week is understanding, of course, the issue, translating it to a trade context, and then understanding of what we do. Of all of you and your experiences, what would be the real main recommendation that you would give for our work, how we should take this up for the topic of this panel? So not circular economy in generality, but looking at the design of the product. We had capacity building, we had standards, we had more something with, I think you are more in the rules area, but each of you, what would you pick out to put up? Because then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 brains with us to give us a nice menu. Antoine, right? I'll just go in the same order.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. Again, the question, very big question. For me, it's really an idea of understanding the opportunities and the challenges that circular design can bring to trade relations all over the world. I've mentioned before, and Luca has mentioned it as well, the key aspect of reusability, keeping the value of a good once it has reached its first life cycle, allowing for new value chains of reused goods to remain profitable. That opens up opportunities all over the world for any kind of country, any kind of export country. That's really an opportunity that I would like to highlight, for instance. Yet, again, the challenges we've mentioned, the capacity issue in terms of circular designs. These designs can be fairly technical. They can incorporate materials, technologies, knowledge that are not necessarily available for every exporter or every public authority. So again, this capacity issue, the transparency, traceability, standards issue, understanding, having a common language that can be shared. We know how hard it can be at the multilateral level. There are a number of initiatives, whether it's at the ILO, whether it's within the WTO context, when the TSSD is around. There's a number of channels to discuss these issues, and yet it's very, very hard to actually come across a common language on something that is so technical. So another obvious challenge which has been mentioned. And going down the value chain, downstream, consumption, raising awareness for the consumers, allowing them to have to make adequate choice, having an adequate communication and promotion of the products that have circularity at the heart of their design. So again, this is linked to an agreed standard, so you can actually have an agreed and a common promotion, but allowing the consumers to actually make that kind of choice for me. So really throughout the value chain, production and the opportunities that it can bring for new value chains, the transparency, traceability around the trade relations, and finally for the consumers to make that choice. So as a kind of a nutshell.
You're greedy, you have 2. That's good. We'll note them. Let me turn to Kagauta. What would be your top recommendation to us?
The National Waste Management Strategy for South Africa has 3 key pillars. One is waste minimization, which includes the issue of circular economy. 2 is effective and sustainable waste services, which talks to the involvement of the local authorities as well as the informal sector in waste collection, as in terms of the legislation, it is their mandate. The 3rd pillar is compliance, enforcement, and awareness, which is quite key for transitioning to circular economy. So for me, designing for circularity, designing for recyclability, and designing for longevity are quite important in our transitioning to circular economy. The issue of capacity building is cross-cutting and very important. Maybe to add on it is the issue of research, development, and innovation for evidence and science-based policy interventions that can come up from circular economy research and development to inform circular products and to inform circular design and products that are designed for recyclability. We have in our EPR regulations for e-waste, lighting, paper, and packaging included the requirement for life cycle assessments as well as standards requirements to ensure that we are able to translate this into practical and tangible targets that the extended producer responsibility scheme can contribute to in implementing and in achieving circular economy transition. Thank you very much. All stakeholders are very important, from policymakers as well as industry, academia, and research institutions, because of the multifaceted nature of the issue of circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carauto, in helping to unravel this this challenging topic. Angelica, can we turn to you?
Thank you, Madeleine. I share what Carauto and also Antoine have already mentioned. I think that clarity is also important, because when we talk about, a global value chain and we are talking downstream, upstreams, sometimes it's difficult for not only for consumers, but also for producers, to understand. So clarity is important. And let me tell you that Luca expressed, different elements that are in our, that we support also a lot, the thing of durability that is all are, are connected with the concept of design. Durability, reliability, reusability, and all the abilities that Luca mentioned are, very much linked to the design, I recall when I was a child that I had, electronic devices that used my grandma, and it was used by my mom also, because it was a durability concept there, So I think that we need to return on those issues, and I think that innovation and technology help on that, and the element of a capacity building, that Antoine was explaining, it's very much, it's very important at the end of the day in order to capture all these important things, in the whole chain. So I will bring those ideas.
Thank you so much, Angelica. Luca.
I would say all of the above. But picking up on what almost everyone has said, if we have to try to focus a bit this vast complex of circular economy issue related to trade and in particular the design aspects, I think issue around transparency, traceability, that kind of nexus. Another one, the question which is linked of standards, because if you want to pass information along the value chain, for example, you will have to define which information, how, and so on. A third thing that maybe has not yet been mentioned, but I think could be an initial first step in TESD and in Committee on Trade and Environment is exchanges around best practice in terms of work on circular economy in general. It's already in the work program of the TESD, but perhaps a bit more looking at the design aspects and the best practice around that. What different WTO members are doing that sphere, and what in the context of WTO discussion exchanges and progress could be envisaged in coming months and years.
Thank you. Interesting thoughts. So then, Maria Teresa, I mean, with all that you hear here and you coming from where you come, so how can we do that? Do you have a nice database that gives us all the transparency and traceability information that we can look at?
Well, actually, we have the standard. So 3 years of intense work with multi-stakeholder group of experts, global, has led us to the development of this UN standard for traceability and transparency of value chains. And we do have actually the business and the data model that supports that information flow end-to-end, field to shelf and beyond, to cover also the post-consumption stages of the value chain that is there. Now, the question is, how do we put it, how do we bring it to implementation? How do we bring it to the ground? So, as the circular and digital transition needs to go hand in hand, advanced technologies promise to have an important role there. We have developed as part of our initiative a blockchain system that connects all the value chain actors from the farm through the manufacturing till the brand and the retailing, and now looking also at involving recyclers. so that in a single environment, they can all exchange the data and the credentials that they need to exchange in order to validate claims for sustainable circular performance of products. We have been looking at, such credentials for shoes, for bags, for shirts, for jeans, so very, very concrete and global value chains. Just last week, I was in Uzbekistan, basically because we are working there on the traceability starting from Uzbek cotton fields until the production of the final product. We have been working with Chile, Peru, many countries. Now, the question is really how to support the upstream part of the value chain, because downstream, the capacity is there, skills are there, upstream is much more complex. So you need to create those mechanisms, capacity building, upskilling, reskilling, tech transfer, to enable those actors to participate, in this process. You need to create incentives, financial, non-financial, and you need eventually also to put in place a flexible gradual approach for such type of actors, especially the small ones, and create maybe different levels of compliance for different type of actors to make sure that they can keep up with the pace. So that is really the experience we have learned by working with the value chain, and especially the upstream part. The raw material production, the manufacturing, and finally the branding, retailing, consumption, they all need to be connected. And often there are like gaps and disconnections between these different industries and sectors. So that's why the cross-industry approach is also very important, and the interconnection of different industries that are often part of the same value chains. So that's my input here.
Okay, that's a nice actually collection to the panel we heard yesterday with the, I forgot the name, I see Kelly there with the gentleman from a Canadian company, I think, talking about this interconnection and the importance of that. So there's connections between the topics. Let's thank you for this round. Let me see if I think we had questions from the chat. So we start with the question from the chat and then I'll turn to the room. We have a question: are there efforts to upgrade the EU's digital product passport to the level of the WTO members? I have to put this question to Luca, and I think he's going to say, I would be delighted. But then that's not a question to be put to you, but still I put it to you.
Well, we first have to make it real within the EU. So the first step, because at the moment we are at the stage of a proposal, which we hope our co-legislator will support. And then certainly we would be more than willing to share whatever comes out of that, because we are all part of global value chains. So it's something that has to see all of us involved one way or another. The idea of the environment ministers back in Nairobi in March in the United Nations Environment Assembly was kind of the same. So look at best practices and how we can improve on what we do. In a way, we already have a non-digital passport. Whenever you buy, I don't know, a cell phone, you have instructions on how you operate it. Your clothes, there is a little label with it's wool, it's not wool, how much degree you should wash it, and so on. What is missing most of the time, if not all the time, is the part on the sustainability aspects of that product. And the idea of making that available in a digital form is to make it easier to handle for everyone involved in the value chain. And there is the double aspect of the final consumer, so every one of us who goes in a shop and buys something, but there is even as important, if not more, the one who is first buying the raw materials to make whatever product, then the person or the industry who makes a product, and those who would then repair it or reuse the components or recycle the materials in them. And is that crucial information about chemical composition, about origin of material and so on, that would enable an informed choice by consumers, and would enable those in the middle of the chain, in the middle, I mean, those who would be, that are necessary in order to close the circular loop in terms of reuse, repairing, making the product more durable and so on, are them who need this crucial information at the moment missing.
Yeah.
Well, I was straying away from the, but I hope.
I had a follow-up question, and I see that you also want to respond to this. One follow-up question is, would a digital passport also give detail on material and chemical composition, such as polymers, chemicals, and additives for plastics?
The idea is that it would give sufficient information to evaluate sustainability aspects and environmental impacts. So I don't know, to be honest, I would need to ask colleagues whether it would go down to that specific level of detail. But as a general principle, the kind of information that you would need to be able, because if additives and so on are an important information, I would gather, when it comes to the recycling, for example. Because depending on the additives, if we are talking about plastic types, you may or may not do certain things. So I would imagine that quite a relevant piece of information to be made available, but to be confirmed by experts.
Yeah, just to complement on this, there are two levels. One is exactly the identification of the type of data that you need to collect and exchange in order to have on the label all you need, or on the product, let's say passport sort of, all you need actually to inform producers and consumer choices and to enable this eco design. The second layer is how exactly you transfer this information along the value chain and you make it easy, okay? Now, of course, advanced technologies, the blockchain, for instance, is one of the possible solutions, I mean, not the only solution. There are challenges also there. The question, there is not going to be a global solution that will support that information exchange that we need to have end to end, even when we have identified all the data that we need to exchange. So it will be very important to make sure that at the global level, we have standards that will make different information exchange systems that will operate along the value chain talking to each other. And the interoperability dimension is very, very important. And this is the type of work that in the UN or WTO can be actually brought forward, and where the work of the EU on a digital product passport can be complemented with the global work at the global level. And that's
thank you very much. Maybe we see if there is a question in the audience here. Yes.
Such a excuse me, such a fascinating panel. I just had a couple of questions about the blockchain. And first of all, you know, blockchain is extremely energy intensive, and whether there's been any thought to the environmental externalities of trying to track everything everywhere. And then second, further to the blockchain, that's distributed ledgers are very public. Sort of what's the thinking around protecting intellectual property rights and trade secrets?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very good question, and the question that we have been trying to address in the blockchain pilots we have been implementing. Of course, we have developed a blockchain system with the Swiss University. Now, the system that, I understand from the university that there are evolutions in blockchain technology, and now there are blockchain technologies that are much less energy intensive. So the one that we are currently used for this pilot has, let's say, a lower impact compared to the blockchain systems that you had a few years ago. And as part of the proof of concept we have just published on the blockchain pilots we run, we have discussed exactly this aspect. So just to say that the blockchain technology is evolving in that connection, and that impact, there is an effort actually to reduce the energy intensity related to the data exchange, because it's huge volume of data that are exchanged. And then your second point was, sorry. IPRs, yeah, that's a very critical point, because when it, of course, the blockchain we have designed is it's a privacy by design blockchain. So it's a system that allows to disclose information between the value chain actors at the level that they agree to exchange. So for instance, information from a farmer on the location of the farm to, let's say, the manufacturer, it's something that can be decided to be disclosed only between two actors or for all the value chain actors. So this privacy by design in a blockchain system is possible. But of course, and we have also established, let's say, data management rules of collaboration among the value chain actors. But you need standards for that, because the data privacy and data security is a very sensitive issue, especially in relation to the protection of vulnerable groups, farmers or operators upstream in the value chain. So there is a need to work on those type of standards for regulators at regional, global level, definitely. Yeah, thank you for very good points.
Thank you. Is there anybody of the panel who would like to? Yes, you can.
On the EPR issues, the way we have engineered our proposal for the digital product passport is that, well, first of all, the information to be included will be determined on a product by product category basis. So it's not the same for all types of products. Secondly, all this will be done in cooperation with relevant stakeholders, including, of course, producers. Third point, we envisage a system where you are able to access the information on a need-to-know basis. So not all information will be available to everyone. It will depend who you are. So if you are in the stage of repairing, reusing, enabled to repair or to reuse, you would have certain information. If you are the end user, others. And lastly, but it's valid for whatever information, cybersecurity and so on, the security aspect. But this, I mean, is not typical for the digital product passport. This is a general issue about your credit card details, my ID information on the Italian system and so on.
Thank you. Is there, I'm checking whether there is another question online. I'll check here in the room also whether there are questions. Yes, there is. So we have a question here. It's a long text. So moving from all value chains to the automotive value chain, where circularity of batteries is a critical issue, especially in the EU. It is indeed the industry where the concept of the digital passport originates. Recycling of vehicles and batteries is extremely complex and geographically dispersed. What are your thoughts on facilitating trade of intermediaries? I hear next to me. So Antoine, this is a question for you.
Thank you very much. Yes, this idea of moving toward a particular sector, in that case, the automotive industry, allows also to cover an aspect that we touched maybe a bit less in the conversation, is really how circular design can impact what to do of a product once it's being discarded. That links to the content of a product and passing information on the content and potentially the dangerosity of the content. And when looking specifically at the automotive industry, and here we have an example, we've been working on a paper that we published last month, specifically on that. I will have to limit myself to the EU market, unfortunately, because that's where we have our findings. But it's in a nutshell, the EU car transports are responsible for roughly 15% of all EU emissions, more or less, in 2019. And the EU has made a pledge to become climate neutral by 2050. To do that, it's estimated that the EU transport sector will have, the emissions of the EU transport sector will have to be reduced by 90%, so sharing a lot of that effort. The EU is doing this a lot through a transition toward electric vehicles. Quite simple like that. The demand for electric vehicles is increasing a lot in the EU markets in these past few years, and it's expected to continue. Now, this comes at a cost. To electrify the entire car transport sector in the EU, we estimate that more than 227 megatons of key materials will be necessary. That's roughly 3.5% of the EU total raw material demand or consumption. So that is a staggering amount, essentially. And even though the EU is moving toward more circularity, it cannot meet its supply on its own. That's where circular design is crucial. That from one aspect. The second one, so the circular design of vehicles and batteries. The other issue is that the batteries, and especially the lithium-ion batteries, the recycling process is considered dangerous. And it's a very complex process and a dangerous process due to the composition of the batteries with toxic chemicals. And the improper disposal of these batteries can lead to soil, water contamination, GHG emissions if we burn them to recuperate that valued material. So once again, we see the importance of sharing the information, accessing the information, sharing the information, and putting in place proper reusability concepts. And the automotive industry is a particular one. We know that you can have a tendency to export some hazardous message. We know that this can happen in the automotive sector, and you know that this could happen in the electric vehicle sector as well. So really, so this is to highlight a particular example related to that sector.
Okay, so what do we need to do with trade with that? Are there more questions coming out of the chat? I'm looking, is there any question here from the audience? Otherwise, maybe let me look. I think it could be interesting on this sort of more sector aspect, or maybe what we can pick up on is, Ms. Romero, you've mentioned the roles of private and public sector. And how could we translate this role of private sector and public sector in international cooperation to help economies in your country progressively adjust to the circular economy? Maybe you, and then Mr. Calgata, you may also have ideas on that. Angelica.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think that the examples that you gave, that Antoine gave, you know, in automobile or in another sector, shows the importance of, you know, working public and private sector working together. We have, for example, we are part of here. There is an association that is part of the pact of the global pact of the plastic, for example, that looks for, you know, not only reduce the use of plastic, you know, but also to have a sustainable management of them. So there is a lot of plastic that could be recycled, but it's important to have, you know, a very good identification of the plastic. Otherwise, you cannot you know, enter into the process. So, and in fact, in WTO, in TESDI, we have been discussed, you know, how we can move, you know, in order to better understand the way we you know, we use the information, and we support circularity. And there is also the discussion in the IDP, that is the informal dialogue on plastic, that is already, you know, discussing with WTO, but also with the custom, you know, in order to see how we can bring together. So at the end of the day, is the private sector who recycles, you know, and make the produce the goods, and they need to better understand. So good rules, help them in order to see how they produce, how they manage, how they recycle, but we need to work together in order to have this rule, as Maria Teresa was explaining, to have a common ground, to a common understanding, and facilitate at the end of the day this work. And internally, we have been working through the Ministry of Environment, with all the actors in circularity, and we have public roundtables in order to do that nationally, and of course supporting the work internationally.
Thank you very much. Kagauta, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, it's very important to mention the role of the policy makers in terms of taking forward circular economy in trade issue. The role of private sector will be to assist with technical capacity and other resources for circular economy implementation. The experience sharing that was alluded to by my colleague in the panel is also very important because it comes from experiences that, among others, are as a result of the involvement of the public-private sector. Public sector participation also in policy administrative environment setting for circular economy implementation is also very key because it enables policies, legislation, strategies, as well as regulations and standards that are designed for enabling circular products, as well as circularity, design for longevity, design for recyclability. I also agree with my colleague earlier on around the reuse having a strong potential because there is less energy intensive, and at the same time you are able to involve as many participants as possible in the value chain because it has collection involved, it has the sorting, it has the management or processing of the material. Lastly, in addition to e-waste, paper and packaging, as well as the lighting EPRs in South Africa, we also have batteries, waste oils, as well as pesticides, which are at the draft stage, published for public comments. We're going through comments and responses on these. Once finalized, we will be getting them to implementation as well to add on the existing EPR schemes that are there and for products that have a potential for trade, because in our definition of the importer or of the producer in the EPR schemes, we also include the importer because of the recognition of the importance of trade on these products from the EPR, as well as designed and manufactured for recyclability. The labeling is also quite key and critical aspects to it for the customer to know what is it that is in that particular product. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you so much. Is there any other colleague of the panel who wants to give other final thoughts before?
Maybe just 3 concluding messages, but in 3 words. Just policy coherence, I think, very important, targeted support, and collaborative business models and platforms. I think these are
Policy coherence,
targeted support, and then collaborative business models and platforms. So those 3 points that I think is important to take.
it's a nice transition to summing up and concluding remarks. Next time you go. No, I think this was extremely useful and rich panel. Thank you so much. And actually you've highlighted multiple, not only several, multiple developments, issues. We've had very rich examples and experience of countries, the example of Chile, South Africa, example of the EU, but certainly also the overall capturing by Maria Teresa. So the exchanges have shown that the transition towards a more resource efficient and circular economy has broad interlinkages with international trade through cross-border supply chains, end-of-life value chains, services trade, increasing trade in secondary materials such as trade in second-hand goods with lower environmental impacts. Refurbished products could be supplied significantly faster than products extracted from virgin materials and at a lower environmental impact. And we've learned that product design can play in favoring product lifetime extension, repair, reuse, and easier recycling. And we've heard more examples. And it has presented the role of digital solutions like electronic product passport in enabling circulation of these goods. We've also heard the importance of access to markets. I've noted access to the whole issue around standards, the role and capacities of SMEs, transparency and traceability nexus, best practices, and experience sharing, which brings you also to your nexus public-private sector, your policy coherence, support, collaborative business models. I think that's actually very nicely and neatly built in. This is not sort of you have an environmental concept and there's a development dimension to it, but it actually goes throughout the whole logic of the supply chain. So that is a clear message, I think, from all of you to pay attention to that and not leave developing countries behind, and ensuring that we are able to be they are able to be part of the circular markets. You mentioned that actually that upstream knowledge, etc., is there, but we need to invest in the downstream and SMEs, as I've mentioned. So today's discussion and also the other sessions in circular economy have given ample ideas on how the WTO can best contribute to facilitating this transition. And we now need to see what the bottlenecks are and try to identify what we can take up, maybe best practices, how we can fit that in our WTO discussions to promote and contribute to facilitating circularity worldwide. Thank you so much for this, for organizing this. Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you for participating, and thank you, panelists, for this
Thank you very much.
fantastic contribution. Bye-bye, South Africa, Kagaute and Angelica. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. You are sitting there in the nice weather. We are up here, are supposed to move to winter, but I can tell you that we are here in the summer setting. Sunny Geneva, we are having lunch outside. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.